16th meeting of the Monmouth City Council. We are not live streaming tonight, but this will be available on our regular recorded YouTube channel. And I will ask Phyllis Bowman for the roll call, please.
Counselor Belts.
Here.
Counselor Carey.
Here.
Counselor Lopez is excused. Counselor McKeel is excused. Counselor Oberst.
Here.
Counselor Ridgway.
Here.
Mayor Kunz.
I am present. Counselor Ridgway, would you lead us in the flag salute this evening, please? Thank you for that. And that brings us to our consent calendar. Our last meeting was August 19th. Those minutes are included in the packet, and if anyone has any corrections, additions, or a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of the council meeting of August 19th, 2025. Second.
Councilor Ridgway for the motion and Councilor Oberst for the second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. That does bring us to our public comments. And at this time, we do have reserved for items not on our agenda. Our comment time remains 3 minutes per individual. And Councilor Carey has the timer for that, so we can make sure that we are fair in this. So tonight we have comment from Priscilla Cannon. Priscilla, if you want to come up and get to the microphone there, be sure and press the center so that the red light is on.
Good evening. My name is Priscilla Cannon. I live in the Orchard Heights subdivision just west of this location. I've lived there for only 32 years. What I'm here tonight is with regards to appearing before you regarding the partitioning of a property in Orchard Heights. The address is 210 Walnut, which is just below the Cupid's Knoll. So that's why I'm here. I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but I'd ask that you do become aware of it after tonight. So if I can try to get within this time. So I'm appearing here regarding this petition. There's a limited amount of time to send comments or concerns to the planning department, which is with Mr. Craig and Ms. Duffner. I visited the planning department and had a conversation with Mr. Craig. He said that this letter that only went out to within 250 feet of the 210 Walnut. So approximately 3 homes in every direction. And I was surprised because I didn't get a copy of this. A friend of mine who lives within that parameter told me about it and sent me a copy of it over the phone. So that's why I came down the very next day and visited with Mr. Craig. I actually taped our conversation so that I could refer back and forth to it. I know that someone within saw that. Okay. I also know that this letter, again, if you've read it or seen it, there's no date. There's no date of when this was compiled, yet it talks about that it has to be received within 14 days of the mailing. And so I had to ask him what time or date that the date of mailing was, and he told me September 11th. So the 14-day that he told me of the decision that will be made is, or the deadline for comment is September 22nd. So I asked who exactly makes the decision, how involved it was with the city manager, and when would the city council be involved. I then asked about an appeal process if the application is approved. I also believe that the city engineer, civil engineers, public works director should be involved ahead of this decision. And I also asked if he had ever visited that western neighborhood or Walnut or been up to Cupid's Knoll, and he said no. So I believe a true evaluation of and I'm not an engineer, but I was a planner for 30 years myself. Oh, am I out of time? It said 2 minutes. Am I done? Oh. I did speak to both a past councilman and a past mayor who both live up there, and they're surprised at the plan to put in a duplex in the neighborhood. I beg of you to at least drive through the neighborhood and see what these homes look like and and not let it turn into a Clay Street or a College Street, and hopes that, you know, our neighborhood could at least remain much like where you live in the Edwards Addition, where you have free space, or where you live in McMinnville, and be able, we are committed to growth. And you see right down here, there's a triplex that went in, and there's a house right next door. Jackson Commons expanded to double its size. So we are doing something. If you've not driven down the 300 block of the new Hoxton Street, there's almost 400 apartments down there that are due to be finished in any time. And then lastly, we also have the new church apartments that opened up 1.5 years ago. And then just recently from the Burn and Learn, right on College Street, this one house that burnt down, and now there's 15 pods in there, double-story apartments that are there. So we are achieving, and I say we because I live in this town, and I know that growth is necessary. And I just hope that that you consider this, and that you're involved in it, and and that's what we want in the neighborhood. And I just came here to speak for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. And we will make sure we get a response to this. I believe we all got copies of at least one letter that was submitted, and apparently there have been others. And so we'll be getting a response out to that. In fact, the city manager may address that tonight in her comments. All right. And that takes us to a presentation this evening. And not having our early September meeting, you might have all missed this, but the month of September is in fact library card sign-up month. And so I did sign a proclamation, and we'll read that now into the record, that whereas libraries are foundational to education, imagination, and opportunity, offering everything from early literacy programs to digital tools that support lifelong learning and personal growth. And whereas libraries welcome all people, serving as inclusive and accessible community hubs that connect individuals across cultures, generations, and experiences, whereas libraries curate collections and design programs that reflect the diversity of the populations they serve, ensuring equitable access to information, technology, and culture for all. Whereas libraries help individuals navigate life challenges by providing trusted information, digital access, job search support, and connections to essential services. Whereas libraries contribute to thriving local economies by equipping job seekers, entrepreneurs, students, and creators with the tools and training to succeed. Whereas in times of both crisis and calm, libraries and their staff remain steadfast in supporting and strengthening their communities. Whereas library resources help households save money, reduce waste, and make sustainable choices, all through the simple power of a shared public good. And whereas a library card opens doors to endless possibilities, from books and technology to lifelong learning and imagination. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Cecilia Elkins, do hereby proclaim September 2025 as Library Card Sign-Up Month in Monmouth, Polk County, Oregon, and encourage all of our residents to sign up for a library card and explore the endless possibilities it offers. So that has been shared, and I hope that we are all doing our part to let folks know about. Not all libraries are good. We got to give it up for all libraries, but our library is amazing. Our library staff, the services we offer, and really how it is a hub in our community. So this is a great month if you're not a regular library goer to find out what that's all about. And that takes us to our business agenda. We have one item tonight. So I believe that we'll have our Director of Power and Light, Wade Carey, joining us at the center table. And it looks like we have a guest online, Wade. I think if you can see Paul on there.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. This evening, we would like to present to you the completed electric utility rate study and cost of service analysis that FCS performed for Monmouth Power and Light. This was a sizable undertaking. It took several months to complete. Just the data collection alone was a pretty heavy lift for our finance department and Monmouth Power and Light. Online, we have Paul Quinn. He was our project manager for this, and FCS has done these types of studies for dozens of electric utilities within the region, most all of our BPA customers. So they have a great deal of expertise in this, which is much more than anything that we house internally within the city. So in the packet, you have a copy of the final rate study. Paul is going to go over some slides, and Mayor, would you like to have questions brought up as they come or wait till the end?
We're fine with it going through it as they come up, if that works for you and Paul.
Yes, I believe that will work as well.
Yep.
So just wanted to get that clarified beforehand. So I'm going to turn this over to Paul and let him take it away.
Well, thank you, Wade. Thank you, counselors, for having me here tonight to go over the results and findings of the electric cost of service rate study.
You're breaking up quite a bit here. Just gonna see nothing we can do on our end, probably to.
Is this any better?
No.
Okay. I can see if dialing in would help clear the audio. Would you like me to try that?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Give me a minute here. I have to stop sharing my screen to do this, so just give me a minute.
It sounds good right now, Paul.
Oh, sounds good now?
Yes.
Okay. Give this a second go. So can you all see my screen and hear me okay? Great. So as Wade said, I'm an assistant project manager here at FCS, a Bowman company. I'm here to present the findings from the electric cost of service rate study. So I wanted to give you a quick agenda before we get into the results. We're going to go over an overview of what a rate study is, what are the different steps we take in a typical comprehensive rate study. We'll talk about some of the key assumptions that we included into the analysis, and then we're going to start stepping into some of the results, starting with the revenue requirement or the overall results, and then we'll kind of have a larger discussion at the end with you all. So in terms of a rate study or the rate setting process, I like to think of it in 3 steps. So the first step, we have what we call the revenue requirement. This is where we just define the overall needs of the utility on an ongoing basis. So in other words, how much revenue does the utility need on a year-to-year basis to cover its ongoing expense obligations and get the identified capital plan funded? In other words, in step 1, we define how big the pie is, so to speak. Step 2 is the cost of service. This is the equity evaluation. This is where we are going to allocate each component of our revenue requirement to our different customer groups to determine, what does it cost us to serve them? So if step 1 is defining the size of the pie, step 2 is determining, how big of a slice each customer group should get of the pie or the costs of our utility. And once we get through steps 1 and 2, we get to the rate design step. This is where we're actually going to design the rate structure. It can be a very simple process, or it can be very complicated if we want to do a lot of rate design or rate structural changes, depending on what we want to do. So with that in mind, I did want to share a few key assumptions that are included in the analysis before we look at some of the results. We did utilize the fiscal year 25 and 26 budgets as a baseline for our operating expenses and some of our miscellaneous revenues. Forecast our operating expenses into the future. We relied on various assumptions.
Now you're cutting out again a little bit, just in that last couple of sentences.
Okay. My back now. I still a little jumbled. Can you guys hear me, or am I breaking up?
Hang on just a second, Paul.
Sure.
All right, we're turning off our cameras just to see if that helps a little bit. So if you want to try again, Paul.
Sure. Can you guys hear me now? No. Okay, I think I'm gonna try dialing in over the phone. So if you guys can bear with me for a couple of minutes, I'm gonna disconnect from computer audio and I will dial in with my phone to see if that clears up these audio issues we're having.
Okay, sounds good.
I just gotta stop my screen share, so give me 1 sec. Okay, can you all hear me clear now? Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for your patience on that. So to jump back into the slide deck, what we were going through are some of the key assumptions that are included in the analysis. We talked about how the 26 and 25 budgets were used as a baseline for certain operating and miscellaneous revenues. To forecast those expenses into the future, we relied on certain inflationary assumptions, anywhere from 3 to 10% per year, depending on the line item we're looking at. On an average basis, we are forecasting operating costs to increase by about 4.4% on average through 2029, again, utilizing some of those assumed inflationary factors. We did create a load forecast to forecast revenue and power. On average, we're increasing our annual meter sales or our load by about 0.17% per year. Those power expenses, we are forecasting based on that load development and the Bonneville Power Authority rates or BPA rates. On average, the power and transmission expenses that are assessed by Bonneville are increasing by about 3% per year during this forecast period. So with some of those assumptions out of the way, what I wanted to go over now is step one, the revenue requirement, and looking through the findings for the electric utility. So again, what the revenue requirement, what we're trying to do here is determining the overall amount of rate revenue the utility needs on an ongoing basis to fully fund its operating power costs, debt service obligations, its capital program on a standalone basis. We're also going to incorporate any financial reserves or policies that you all might uphold the utility. What I'm going to be showing you is a period between fiscal year 26 and 2029. So that's the kind of the rate setting period that we looked at for the rate study. And we really are trying to walk a tightrope when we, are looking at rate increases. We do want to ensure that the utility is bringing in enough money to cover its ongoing obligations, but we do recognize that any increases to rates can be a burden on our customers. We do want to walk the line, the tightrope between increases, try and make them smooth over time so they're easier to plan for from a customer's perspective. So some of the key factors that go into a revenue requirement. First, we're going to look at our existing revenues before any rate adjustment. So that graphic below shows our total utility revenues, both rate and miscellaneous, during the forecast period before any rate adjustments, including the one that we just recently adopted. Our other revenues include the net loan repayment, reconnect charges, some conservation revenue we received from BPA, miscellaneous revenue, pole attachments, and investment interest. So overall, we're forecasting revenues to be between 8.1 and 8.2 million without any rate adjustments through 2029. And then we start looking at some of our ongoing obligations, starting with our operating expenses. As I mentioned before, we use the 25 and fiscal year 26 budget as a baseline for those expenses into the future. We relied on some inflationary assumptions. The average increase over this time period is about 4.4%. It is important to note that the 26 budget does have some contingencies or future expenditure line items that are likely not going to be recognized. Those expenses have been excluded for the purpose of setting the rates. So over the 4-year period we're looking at, operating expenses are ranging between $4.4 and $5 million per year. Then we look at power. So as a single expense, your Bonneville Power Authority costs are the largest single expense that the utility is going to incur. They are largely out of your control. If the authority is going to be setting their rates to you, and then you guys got to come up with the utility's got to come up with the cash to pay them. So the forecast, these expenses, we developed a load forecast in conjunction with city staff and discussions with them, and applied the Bonneville billing determinants and rates. They are going to be implementing a new rate starting next month. So we do have the draft federal fiscal year 26 power and transmission rates starting for next month's period. Now, historically, Bonneville has increased their rates every other year. So every 2 Octobers, they have a rate adjustment, so the next one being next month. We're in a little bit of a unique spot, though. They are renegotiating the contract with you all and their other customers. The next rate cycle will be 3 years, actually. So the next increase or change to the Bonneville rates that the utility will see is in October of 2028. Those rates, we assume they would increase their power rates by 5% and their transmission rates by 5% as well. So over this 4-year window, we are anticipating power and transmission costs assessed by Bonneville to be between $3.6 and $3.9 million. And then we get to capital and debt. So the utility does have one loan outstanding. It's about $300,000 per year. The last payment is, I believe, 2030 or 2029. Sorry, so the last payment for that existing loan is 2029. When we look at capital over this 4-year window, we're anticipating about $3 million in capital expenditures. You can see they're a little lumpy, you know, a little higher in the front end in 2028 and a little lower in 27 and 29. We are anticipating funding these expenditures either through existing reserves or money through rates. So we are not anticipating going to the debt markets in the next 4 years. It is important to note that looking out to 2030, it does look like there might be a substation construction happening in 2030 or around that time period. It is likely that the utility will, you know, need to go to the debt markets at least to fund a portion of that project, just because of, you know, I think the scheduled cost or the anticipated cost is $5 or $6 million at this time. And finally, we do incorporate, you know, your fiscal policies, reserve targets for the utility. You do have an operating reserve minimum target of 25% of operating costs and power. That's between $2.1 and $2.3 million per year, depending on the year we're looking at. There is a policy for total ending cash to be at least 2 times greater than annual debt service. You only have one loan right now. It's about $300,000. That would put that target around $600,000 for your total cash target. And then we are tracking debt service coverage. This is typically a requirement on revenue bonds, not on your existing loans or other loans you might be targeting. But if you were to issue revenue bonds, the minimum target is generally 1.25 times. What that means is the utility's operating income, so operating revenues less operating expenses, needs to be at least 25% greater than the annual revenue bond debt service. But at this time, the utility has no revenue bond, so it's not necessarily something that you know, is having an impact at this time. So putting all those key factors together, you know, we form the revenue requirement. This is a graphical visualization. The stacked colored bars in this chart represent our ongoing expenses or capital costs. That blue bar represents our annual operating and maintenance costs. Orange bar represents our BPA power and transmission costs. The yellow bar is that you know, $300,000 for the existing loan. And then the green bar represents our capital costs, net of any developer or native construction proceeds that the utility may get from new development. That solid black line at the top of the chart represents our total rate and other revenues before any rate adjustments. So what we can see comparing the stacked bars to that solid black line is those bars are greater, they're higher than that revenue line. In other words, the utility is going to need to draw down from reserves in order to get everything funded without any rate adjustments. In fact, what we're seeing in 2026 is that ignoring capital, your power, operating costs, and debt service, that total is actually greater than your revenues coming in. So you would need to draw down, the utility would need to draw down from reserves to pay for all its ongoing costs without any rate adjustment. Now, as you can see over time, the bars start to get higher and higher as we're predicting costs to increase, you know, quicker than our load growth. And we're not, you know, the solid black line, again, does not bake in any rate increases, so that operating deficiency would grow over time. The other visual aid I'm showing you here is that, that dark blue area shaded shade behind the bars. That represents our ending operating cash from each year. That dotted black line represents the 90-day or 25% target of O&M and power expenses. So without rate adjustments in 2026, you know, we would stay healthily above that 25% target. In 27, we would dip a little below. 29 is when we would, you know, predict that the utility would actually run out of cash reserves without turning to the debt markets to fund capital or turning to rate increases to help bump revenues. So really, in summary, you know, we kind of went, yeah, was there a question?
Nope,
Sorry,
not
I heard
yet.
some. So just to summarize, you know, revenues at current rates they're not sufficient to support the utility. We are seeing that, without that 6% that we just adopted, the utility would have been operating at a deficit, operating deficit this year. Without any rate adjustments, we would predict that, cash reserves would be completely depleted by 2029, and we would be violating that 2 times annual debt service total cash target by 2028. In order to fund all our obligations and address the capital program, what we've come up with is this projected annual increases. So in the table below, you're projecting annual 6% rate increases in fiscal year 26, 27, and 28, followed by a more inflationary increase of 3% in fiscal year 2029. You can see for a typical residential bill of 900 kilowatt hours per month, how that bill would be changing over the 4-year time period. A customer would see anywhere from a $5 to $6 increase per month in the front end, followed by about a $3.30 per month increase on the back end with these proposed increases. As I think I mentioned earlier, the 2026 increase of 6% has already been adopted. What we're really looking at now going forward is the 27, 28, 29 increases. So I think at this point, I just want to pause. We're going to shift gears into step 2, cost of service, but I want to see if anyone has any questions on the revenue requirement step before we talk about equity and cost of service.
Oh,
Yeah, okay,
yeah, I'm okay for now.
okay, okay for now.
Thank you. So once we go through step 1, again, we're defining the size of the pie. What are the, rate adjustments that the utility will need going forward? Once we define that, we can move on to step 2. Step 2 is going to take each component of our revenue requirement, all the costs, and we're going to allocate them to our different customer types to determine what it costs us to serve, different customer groups. Really, the question we're asking is, do cost differences exist to serve different classes of service? So as I mentioned that, one of the outputs of the cost of service is we'll know what it costs us to serve our different customer groups. That's kind of the big result that we're looking for. Another output that we get is unit costs. So from a cost basis, what can we justify charging our customers on a monthly fixed charge? What are their energy costs on a per kilowatt hour basis? So we're really getting to the unit costs as well in the cost of service analysis. So thinking of the cost of service analysis, it can be broken down into 3 steps. First step is the functionalization of our costs. We're going to look at all our costs, all our assets, and determine if they provide, power generation functions for the utility and our customers. Are they providing some sort of local transmission benefit? Is it a distribution benefit? Is it something more general or maybe a direct customer benefit? We're trying to break down costs into what function they perform for our customers. Number 2 is we're going to take all our costs by function, and we're going to classify them into our cost pools. This is going to give us the ability to allocate them to our customer groups in step 3. So the cost pools that I'm referring to are our costs. Do we incur this cost to provide some sort of direct customer service? Is it there to provide some sort of energy service to our customers? Is it there to provide a demand or a peak usage service to our customers? So we're going to classify those cost pools, and then in step 3, once we have the cost by cost pool, we have a very rational basis to allocate those costs to our customers based on how they're using the system, and we'll get into that. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about these 3 steps. So again, functionalization, we're going to allocate our costs and our assets to the functions that are performed by the utility for our customers. Ideally, we like to utilize a uniform system of accounts to do the functionalization step. The most common uniform system of accounts in the electric world is the FERC system of accounts. If you're not familiar with FERC, they're a federal agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they do a lot of regulation work for both electric and natural gas utilities. They have a system of accounts for both assets and costs that essentially functionalizes them for you. So they have a whole production function. I'm showing you the asset codes and the operating cost codes that would come along with that. They have a transmission function, a distribution function, and customer function. Now, unfortunately for your utility, you're not utilizing that FERC system of accounts or another uniform system of accounts. So we did have to spend quite a bit of time with staff, reviewing your assets, reviewing your individual cost line items to determine what functions they're performing for the utility and our customers. I did want to show you kind of summary level results from this first functionalization step. So on the top table, looking at your different types of assets. So you're primarily a distribution utility, but you do have a local transmission asset. So looking at the breakdown by original cost, about 92, 93% of your assets are those distribution, so those poles, wires, transformers, substations, but you do have a local transmission asset, makes up about 7 or 8% of your total asset costs. Now, functionalizing the assets really helps when we start to functionalize the costs, because if there's a cost line item associated with maintaining the assets or the distribution system, we can look at how those costs were, or those assets were functionalized to functionalize the cost. So in that lower table, I'm summarizing, your different budget cost categories and showing you what functions they fell into. So purchase power, the Bonneville Power Authority costs, those costs are there to, generate power that we're going to deliver to our customers. Everything else are either labor or non-labor costs for the utility, and most of those costs, or all those costs, are there to support the assets or the maintaining or operating the assets in some manner, so they're getting allocated to transmission and distribution. Some of those costs are also there to provide a direct customer benefit, such as utility billing, customer service, so they're getting allocated to that customer function. Overall, BPA, or that production cost, and some of the associated line items are about 50% of your overall revenue requirement. The distribution function is about 40%, and the remaining 10% is split between customer and transmission. Once we have our cost by function, we're going to take each function and we're going to classify them to cost pools. This is going to give us a rational relationship between our functions and costs, and allow us to, or give us a clear methodology to allocate those costs to our customers based on how they're using the system. We're going to allocate those costs based on some sort of customer, account-based metric, energy usage metric, or some peak demand type billing statistic. So to give you a couple examples, I'm showing you 3 functions here: customer, production, or transmission. What we're really trying to ask ourselves in this step is, what's the cost driver for our different costs? Typical cost driver for a customer-related cost, such as customer billing, would be the number of accounts you have on the system. The more accounts you have, the more billing costs you might incur for the utility. Production, that would be like Bonneville Power energy purchased. Those costs are going to change depending on the amount of energy you use over time. And then on your local transmission, operating and maintenance costs, typically we're sizing our transmission system to make sure we can hit or meet our peak demand needs as a system. So those are why those costs are going to be changing, and so we're going to allocate those costs based on some demand metric of our customers. Just to spend a little more time on the cost pools, again, energy costs. These are costs that are going to vary with total consumption of energy over time, typically measured in kilowatt hours. Demand, these are costs that are going to vary or predicated based on maximum usage or kind of peak usage of our customers. There can be different types of demands that costs are related to. Bonneville bills based on how your system as a whole is peaking, but some of your distribution type assets are sized to meet your individual customer demands. So we do use different demand metrics to allocate certain demand-based costs. And then customer, these are generally fixed costs in nature that are going to vary based on the number of, customers you have on the system and aren't really going to vary depending on energy or peak usage. Good examples of these are metering or billing, or even some of the backbone infrastructure requirements of the system. Looking at your utility and the classification step, it's pretty equally split between energy and demand, about 40% in energy, 40% demand, and the remaining 20% or so as a direct customer or fixed cost benefit. So the third step of cost of service, once we have the cost by cost pool, it gives us a real rational basis to allocate those costs to our customer groups. The allocation factors I'll show you in a moment are really based on your billing statistics. That's where we start. We've taken a look at, I believe, a couple of years of your monthly billing statistics. We've developed a load profile, demand profile for all of your customer groups, and that gives us the ability to allocate some of these costs. These are the specific allocation factors we used. So you can see the three cost pools: demand, energy, and customer at the top. Within each cost pool, there can be different, types of demand, energy, or customer allocation factors. If you look at energy, for example, Bonneville charges you some costs based on total energy, but some of their load shaping rates look at specific times in the day, what they call heavy load hours, or HLH, or light load hours, LLH. So looking at, why do we incur this cost? How is it changing over time? And that's how we're going to allocate it to our customer group. If we single out residential, on the top right, you can see they're about 90% of your accounts. So any customer expense that we're allocating based on accounts, they're going to get 90% of those costs. But since, your commercial customers are using more on a per account basis, they're peaking higher on a per account basis. If you look at demand and energy, residential is only between 60 or 70% of demand or energy allocation factors. So even though they're 90% of accounts, on a per account basis, they use less, so they're going to get less of the share of demand or energy costs, where some of your commercial customers will get a higher amount relative to their customer share. That really brings us to the results. So these are the overall cost of service results, and I do want to walk you through this graphic. What we do in the overall cost of service result is we compare how you're currently collecting revenue against the allocated cost to serve each customer group. So that solid black line on 100%, that represents the true cost of service target for each customer group. You'll notice there's a dashed line above and below that target. That represents the range of reasonableness that we look at the results in. We generally look at the results using a plus or minus 10% range of reasonableness. In other words, if we can get our customers within plus or minus 10% of their allocated costs, we can reasonably say we're charging our customers based on what it costs us to serve them. The rationale for looking at a range of reasonableness: customer demands, the way your customers use the system is going to change over time. The proportionality of your cost is going to change over your time. Bonneville is in the process of potentially changing their cost methodology for how they assess you costs, so that could be changing over time. So the cost of service target is going to be constantly fluctuating, little bits year by year. So to recognize that, we do look at that range of reasonableness for each of our customer groups. What we can see looking at the results is the residential customer class, they're within those dashed lines. So they're, we are charging them adequately. They're within that cost to serve. The single phase commercial customers, they're a little below that, outside that range of reasonableness. So what that means is their revenues, they're paying less. We're currently collecting less revenues than what it costs us to serve them. And then if we look at some of our larger commercial customers, the three-phase and the primary metered customers, we are currently collecting a little bit more than what it costs us to serve those customer groups. So again, this is the overall cost of service result. We're comparing how we're currently collecting revenue to what it costs us to serve these groups of customers. What we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want to do with this information? there's really one option for consideration. Overall, it's do we want to consider the cost of service results when we set our rates and design our rate structure, or do we want to acknowledge them but address them at a later time? For the fiscal year 26 rates, we addressed rates across the board, so we did not incorporate the cost of service results into that rate increase. The rationale being that this is your first cost of service study in many, many years. There's a lot of things the utility could be doing to improve some of the data that goes into the cost of service results. So really we're taking the approach of, maybe in a couple of years we update the cost of service. If, results are pointing in the same direction, using another data set, then maybe we start to address it at that time. But the other option for consideration is maybe, yes, we actually want to start addressing cost of service a little more quickly. And if that's something we want to do, we have to decide, do we want to make, a large, one-time adjustment to our rates? Not something I would typically recommend. Typically, if we want to address the cost of service results, we would recommend a phase-in. So over time, we would gradually phase our customers in. Example of how that would work, if we were looking for a 6% overall increase, customers who are paying less than cost of service, they would see maybe 6.5% increase every year. Customers who are paying more than cost of service, maybe they get a 5.5% increase over year. And that way, over time, we can make progress towards cost of service without making, large one-time adjustments that might confuse or upset some of our customers. So at that point, we're through step 2, the cost of service. Again, I'll pause here for a moment. Just want to make sure you all don't have any questions either on the revenue requirement or cost of service steps.
Councilor Carey?
And maybe you'll get to this as we go, but a slide back or so, you had the CASA and who was paying what percentage. The residential and commercial were paying a little bit less than what it cost to deliver. And the others, the general purpose and primary metered, were paying more. But yet the recommendation is going to be for a flat 6% without differentiating between us. Do we just not have enough data that we're confident in that we can make a determination of that? Or is that something we need to look at down the track? I wondered about that because there's a lot of, and it's more than, there's a lot of differentiation between our different user types, but yet everybody's being treated the same. I don't know. I'm just asking.
One of the things that we struggle with a little bit on the data collection is the meter data. So our old metering system at the time we pulled this was half of our service territory was on the old metering system, which didn't have as much data as the new metering system that we're almost fully deployed with. So having a more complete data set over the next couple of years will give us a more refined approach. But honestly, these numbers are not surprising to me. If a utility takes, because large commercial and commercial customers typically pay a higher rate than residential. But if you're just giving a standard 3% increase, 3% increase, 3% increase, those 3% increases become larger for them with a higher rate. So that these are out of skew is not surprising, and they're not all that bad. It would not be my recommendation to not do anything next year. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight, is to present this data to you so that when we come back next year for our rates, we start thinking about, do we want to start making small adjustments to bring these numbers back in? And over time, as we revisit this process and our data set grows and becomes better and more robust, we can start to fine tune it even more. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It does. The cost of service equity evaluation, I think, is good, but it's not as, it's no better than the data that goes in. and to your point. Now, just in terms of order of magnitude, and this was not in the report, how many, I mean, how frequent are our general purpose three-phase users and I don't even know what a primary metered category is, but what's the N on each of those approximately?
So the primary meter customers are just their standard large three-phase commercial customer who we serve to a meter point, and then they have the system behind it. So we don't own it, and really here it's the college. And so they maintain their own electrical distribution system, their own transmission and all that. So while they still fall under our large three-phase general service, they do get a small discount on the bill for that because we don't have to maintain a lot of the equipment. But the last part of your question, I didn't quite understand.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how many, I mean, what's the order of magnitude and how many do we have on the general purpose three-phase groups? I mean, that's, you know, they're, I just don't know how many of those are there? I don't even know what
There's
they
not
are.
very many. So the slide just before this one here, three-phase general purpose is a customer account wise, it's only 1.48%.
Oh, so small.
It's a very
Yeah,
small
yeah,
number,
okay.
and the single-phase commercial is just under 6% of our customer account.
Okay.
So we're not talking large numbers of customers.
Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. I couldn't winnow that out as I read it, but
And an example of the general purpose customers you mentioned, the primary metering is basically Woo. What about our general customers? General
Roths
purpose.
would be one, any of the large commercials. So I don't have all of them off the top of my head, but it's mostly any of the large. So Roths, Winco, the school districts, anything that's got large equipment that requires a three-phase.
Other questions? All right, we're ready to keep moving.
Thank you. So now we're through step 2. So we're on the final step, which is the rate design. Might seem obvious, but what we're doing here is we're developing the actual rate structure of fixed and variable charges that we're going to assess to our customers. There's really, you know, it's not infinite, but there are so many different options on rate design, what we can do. Most importantly, what we want to do is if we want to increase system revenues by 6%, we want to design a structure that's going to increase our revenues by 6%, not 4, not 8. We want 6%. After that, you know, other considerations are largely policy-based. Do we want to send a conservation message by introducing more tiers? You know, do we want to increase fixed charges more than variable? So that, you know, it gets into a lot of policy discussion potentially on the rate structure themselves. And it's important to note that, you know, there's no one magic bullet. There's no one design that's going to solve, you know, all your policy objectives and needs. This is really a balancing act where, you know, if we want to do a 6% increase, we got to design rates to get to 6%. If we have a lot of policy goals in mind, you know, we might not be able to accomplish all of them, or maybe we can accomplish, you know, 75% of the policy goals, but not all of them. Do we want to introduce cost of service phase into the rate design? So that's another element that can, you know, impact the rates themselves. And then some other items, again, more policy-based. You know, do we want rates to be simple and super understandable by our customers? Is that important to us? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. You know, affordability, you know, how does that come into play? Tiers and all that good stuff. So again, it's important to note that, you know, no rate structure is the magic bullet, and a rate structure that works for your neighbors, you know, might not work for you, and vice versa. So it really becomes kind of a balancing act of art and science when we get to rate design. One item that we can look at to help guide us, you know, when we do make rate structure changes is the second output from the cost of service analysis. So that cost of service analysis, it gives us those high level results that we just went over, but it also gives us the cost-based unit costs in terms of, you know, what does it cost us to provide energy on a per kilowatt hour basis to our customers? What about demand? What about, that fixed monthly fee that we assess? These are the cost-based unit costs. If you look at residential for fiscal year 26, we're calculating a cost-based monthly charge of around $29, energy charge of, 4 cents and change, and a demand charge of $6.17. Now, residential customers are not currently assessed a demand charge. That does not mean they do not have demand costs. It just means that we're collecting those demand costs in another charge. In this case, we're collecting them in the energy charge that we're assessing those customers. So again, this can help act as a guide if we do want to start, increasing one rate more than the other, or looking at trying to be more cost-based. It's just a guide. It's not something to fully rely on. You've got to address policy topics as well. Looking at your current fiscal year 26 rates, again, maybe focusing on residential, the fixed monthly charge that we're currently assessing for residential is about $13.70. On the last slide, that cost-based unit cost was around $29 per month. So from a cost basis, we do have justification to increase our fixed charges for our customers if that's something we want to, pursue. One outcome of the current rates we have is we are collecting, our demand costs for residential and the energy charge. We're collecting the energy costs in that energy charge, and then we're collecting some of those fixed-based customer costs in that energy charge. So if we do have something like a warm weather environment where our billed energy units are down, there is a risk that we don't collect all those fixed costs that we might have in the system on the rate design side. So anyway, these rates represent the fiscal year 26 rates that are currently in place. They were adjusted across the board for everyone in 26 over 25. What that means is that all customer classes, all rates, fixed and variable, saw the same 6% increase. So all customers see the same 6% increase on their bill. Some options for future consideration. We look out to 27, 28, the next couple of years. Do we want to continue increasing our rates across the board? Both proportionally to all classes and proportionally to all charges. Do we want to start increasing, the fixed charge more than the energy, vice versa? If we want to start manipulating some of the fixed and variable costs, how quickly do we want to adjust them? Typically, again, we'd recommend some type of phase-in to start making adjustments. Maybe there's other policy considerations that you want to pursue. Conservation tiers for residential is one folks are considering. When you have the metering capability, one trend that's starting in the industry is to start introducing demand-based rates for residential customers slowly over time. So just a couple options for future consideration as you think about rates in the future. The one thing we're always asked is how we stack up against our neighbors. Always like the caveat that this is apples and oranges. Every utility is different. Even your neighbors right next door, they're going to have different geographical footprint. Their customers are going to use the system differently. They might be maintaining the system different than you. They might have a different age of system. So it's really hard to pick, a couple utilities nearby and say these are apples and apples. But we're always asked. So I'm showing you both the fiscal year 25 rate and the current rate in fiscal year 26. Here is a typical bill for a residential customer using 900 kilowatt hours per month. Your current rates put you kind of smack in the middle of the jurisdictions we surveyed. The other thing I'll note here is for most of these, they are most likely also pursuing or in the middle of evaluating their rates and will be adjusting their rates, maybe coming up at January 1st, maybe next year, maybe in 2 years. So it's hard to say where they are in their rate setting process. I know for a fact that Forest Grove recently passed the rate increase. It hasn't taken effect yet, so I didn't want to show it in these rates quite yet, but they will be bumped up a little closer to that 26 rate for you all. Finally, as a last slide, just in terms of next steps, it's important to revisit the rate study assumptions when we get to the next budget cycle. If we're falling pretty close in terms of where we anticipated operating costs, power costs, capital costs, you know, there's not really a reason for an update, but if we start to see, you know, changes in our capital forecast or in the execution of some of our operating costs, it might be beneficial just to revisit the study and look at how rates might change with the new assumptions. And as Wade was saying, you know, one big thing that can improve the results of the cost of service study is refining some of the data inputs. He mentioned the metering information. You all will be getting a little better metering information in the future that will help enhance the results. Reporting in some sort of uniform system of accounts, such as the one FERC offers, does help the cost of service study. And, you know, better asset line item records is another suggestion to help enhance those results. So at this point, I'd like to thank you for having me tonight, and I want to open up the floor to you all for any questions or discussion.
It would take initial thoughts or questions, Councilor Obers.
Just for clarity's sake, when was the last cost of service analysis done? Do we know?
No one has a memory of one.
Ouch.
And really, this is something that we should be undertaking at least every 3 years. With, you know, as Paul said, when we get toward budget season next year, we will give them where we're at with our budget, so we can kind of see where we're tracking revenue wise and whatnot. I mean, the good news is we had our BPA increase this year. We won't have another one until 2028. So that's good news. But as you saw by the data, we still are not collecting nearly enough in revenue for our costs. And so we're going to have to stay on this process to make sure we stay on track so that we're not undershooting with rates or overshooting. We want to be realistic, and at the same time, we want to stretch it out as far as we can go. But with the reserves, the situation as they are, we can't stretch it out too far because then we'll dip too low.
Well, this packet of information is a heavy lift, and I appreciate what you've done and the consultant as well in pulling this together.
Well, thank you.
You know, look, just sort of a general response. When we worry about rates and the rates we're asking residents in Monmouth to pay, yeah, it looks like we're not asking enough because we're coming up short versus what it costs to actually provide that electricity.
Yeah, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, over 23 years. And when I first got in this industry, a lot of especially the COUs, man, we were so blessed with what Bonneville was offering for so long. But Bonneville's situation is so much different than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. I mean, Bonneville brings more energy into the region when they need it than their ability to sell excess. And that drastically changed their cash position. And so I mean, as you can see by the rates, you know, the average bill, we're all in the same boat. Some utilities have it a little better for some reasons than others. Others have it worse, but we're all kind of in this same boat with, you know, material costs have all gone up, labor costs have all gone up, power costs have all gone up. And as the old general manager of Seattle City Light said last year when she was retiring, she said, you know, the days that we've had here in the Northwest because of Bonneville and its position are gone. And now we're starting to be in line more with the rest of the country than what we've had.
I think a fair statement is that Bonneville's not building any more dams. They aren't having an opportunity to increase their generation capacity. So they have to buy the same electric rate that everybody else is paying, and that comes to us. For decades, we got cheap electricity off those dams on the Columbia.
Well, and there's a lot of factors. I mean, I went and did a tour of Bonneville Dam last month with Public Power Council, and they were explaining how the lock works, you know, and it's free for anybody going up or down river. But every time they fill that lock and let it go, it's $10,000 worth of electricity they just let go. And with the spill requirements for the fish habitat and whatnot, that's you know, and we're spilling more now than we ever have. And so those are all opportunities to generate power that we no longer have. And so it's just it's a different environment than it was 20 years ago and even 5.
Counselor Ridgway.
Thank you. So in the last few months, there was the council considered a rate adjustment for 26, correct? And that was, in the graph I was looking at showed the reserves at the end of each fiscal year look really similar now as the one that we saw at that time. Has that been adjusted to show the increase in rates?
Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but the slide that you're speaking about, Counselor, is the one that shows the reserves dipping down.
Correct.
Correct. That does not have the rate increase. Is that true, Paul?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Before
So
any rate adjustments, including,
Yeah, this was put as, because this has the 6, 6, and 3, we wanted to present it as it was, why the 6% was required.
Okay, so the reserves would not look as grim as it shows.
No, the 6% increase we had this year will push that slope out longer.
Okay, thank you.
Slightly. Yeah, Counselor Belts.
I'm just curious, in the city to city comparison, how are those cities selected? Sorry, didn't mean to hit the mic.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
In the city by city comparison, how were each of these cities selected?
It was, the FCS went out and got that data, but we wanted to get a data set one where it was relatively easy to get that data. Not all utilities make it easy to find their rates. But we also wanted ones that were relatively in our location, right? Because the labor and stuff like that will be equitable, as well as customer size, although that's not always easy to do, but and get as many of the COUs as possible.
It just struck me that Independence wasn't in that list.
They're Pacific Power.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why Pacific Power and PGE are all in there, and Consumer Power, who service a lot of our rural areas, are all in there as well.
Yes.
So I'm hearing a couple of things that we probably certainly won't decide tonight, but things that we'll need to come back and have you visit with us. A couple of decision points. One is, what are our policy goals around this? I mean, I think you mentioned, Paul, a couple of considerations in that area are definitely conservation. Do we have different rates based on different levels of usage? So that's one potential decision point that would be policy related. Another one might be an equity decision, right? How do we feel about the different burden on different customers as we consider this? And that might be a policy type decision. I hear some operational decision points. One is changing the whole chart of accounts. And as an accountant myself, I'm gonna guess that's not gonna be super popular. But that's a decision point, right? Do we want to standardize some things so that this cross industry comparison is easier in the future if we're gonna commit to going through this process? I hear making the whole sort of rate structure simple, right? Which again is easier to administer operationally as far as programming rates into your billing software. Or do we want to have different levers that we can use to encourage conservation potentially, or to differently adjust and assess this, the different components of the rates, which those levers, again, make it a little more complex. So those are some things I hear. What did I miss?
Well, one thing that we should really start to pay attention to is the miscellaneous revenues. the most glaring one that we have here is our pole attachment fees. So we charge $2.50 per attachment per pole for communication companies, and we're $2.50 a month, a year, or $4, depending on the agreement. To give you an idea, most utilities are charging in the $15 to $25 range for each of those. Now, this isn't, we only have 1,000 poles roughly, and so we're not talking a large number, but it's clearly an under-collected revenue that has a direct cost to our operational expenses. And so those are the kind of things, and I've been speaking with the city manager about our pole attachment agreement as a way that we can start to make some changes that don't just affect the citizens and the businesses here in town. So there's a lot of ways we can look at how we're collecting our money. Paul brought up the fixed charge versus the energy charge. That's also another thing that is very glaring to me. Our monthly fixed charges, if you look at this chart there, you can see how much lower we are than everyone else. And Paul mentioned, if we have a really warm winter or a cool summer and we don't sell enough of our power, granted, we didn't have to buy that power from Bonneville, but we still have fixed costs that we're collecting in our rates. So if we don't sell enough, we don't collect enough. And so, when we start to look at how we're going to administer increases, those are all the things we need to look at that make the most sense. But I would recommend doing it slowly. Nobody wants any sticker shock, and it'll take a number of years to get there. But this is not, the utility I came with, they were doing this every year. They looked at their cost of service analysis and they were making adjustments. So it's just something that's part of the business and something we need to pay attention to.
Thanks, Wade. Paul, again, any other levers or decision points or things we want to focus on as we have this discussion? We need to have it before they start preparing a budget. So we got to have it in the next 3 months, basically, if we're going to make any changes. Councilor Ridgway, and then Paul, I'll get your answer to my question.
This is a little bit of a sidebar, but just in your view, looking forward in the future, so that this long-term planning, as far as energy production, is there any plans that you're aware of, other than purchasing power from Bonneville, that may be an asset to us in the future? So these rate increases may not go up 5-6% every year indefinitely.
Well, so in Bonneville's position, they have a certain amount of capacity that they manage. And that's what we refer to as the tier 1 allocation. And we get a certain portion of that. Their system that they have is fully subscribed. So as all the loads regionally go up, they're having to go out and buy power. There's no new generation projects that Bonneville's undertaking. Now, Bonneville doesn't necessarily build any generation on its own, but it does work with developers to purchase that output. One example, the Columbia Generating Station over in Washington, Bonneville just helped them approve a retrofit there, which is going to get, I think it was about 140 additional megawatts of power out of it, just through operational efficiencies and new technology there at that station. So that will help. But really, they're just, they're forced to buy what is available. SMR technology is taking off. And of course, the state is kind of looking at lifting the moratorium on nuclear here, but they don't have to put it here in Oregon for Bonneville to have access to that. They can put one anywhere within the service territory, and Bonneville could. But all of those new generation construction projects, the power that would come out of them would be higher than what we're getting out of the legacy hydro. And that's kind of what the point that Deborah Smith made was, all the benefits that we've been having for so long are gone. And now it's just going to start getting more expensive. So, but when you still look at us compared to other parts of the country, I was in San Diego probably 15 years ago, talking to a counterpart down there, and their lowest rate during the day was 13 cents a kilowatt hour. And this is a while ago. So we were probably here at 6.5, 7 cents. but the highest time of the day it was 45 cents, and it's gone up since then. So when you look around the country, we're still really fortunate because of the legacy hydro. It's just that that benefit is already subscribed, and now we have to manage going forward.
Yeah, and us building our own source is clearly out of the question, because that would add multiples of millions to that will cost charge. So yeah, we're not doing that. So supporting Bonneville. I'm gonna just get an answer to my question, and then Councilor Carey.
So on the question about what can we be doing or asking ourselves, I mean, I think, Mayor, you hit it pretty much all of them. I mean, from a rate design perspective, you need to ask yourselves, are the things you want to be introducing in the rate design to enhance conservation, to introduce or start addressing the cost of service equity piece, you know, other policy-based goals. You know, Wade mentioned one. Maybe we take a look at the fixed charge, and maybe that goes up at a higher rate than our energy charge, to start getting closer to the cost-based unit cost. So those are some of the questions to start thinking and discussing on the rate design side. You mentioned maybe transitioning to a uniform system of accounts. I mean, one thing you may consider, a lot of the folks we work with, they will still budget using a similar, you know, set of accounts or process that you all currently do. But at the end of the year, they go through an exercise and report out their actuals in a uniform system of accounts. That still gives us, you know, a kind of a benchmark or a starting point for that first part of the cost of service. So it's not necessarily moving the whole budget process, everything to a uniform system of accounts, but maybe you start, you know, doing an exercise at the end of the year to report in a system of accounts like that, and that, you know, that could help.
So you just have a crosswalk at the end where you take all of your line items and crosswalk them to this other system. Kind of have to do that at the school district to report to our state. So I get that. All right. And then Councilor Carey.
Yeah, I want to, this goes back to sort of a rudimentary thing and early, and I should have asked it in when you first asked this, Paul, but it's really for anyone. I mean, we're talking about an operating reserve the recommendation is operating reserve of 25%, the construction reserve of 1% to 2% of our fixed assets, I believe it is. We've got our fiscal policy says 25% ending fund balance. It's not in those terms at the moment. Would this result, should this be adopted and we go that construction reserve at some point, would that mean more money is reserved beyond the 25% ending fund balance?
Yeah, so that is a good question. That would mean more money, as you're pointing out. What a lot of utilities, electric utilities will, not just electric, but water and sewer as well, what they will do from a reserve perspective, they have a minimum, you know, operating or working capital reserve target like you all have now. Yours is 25% or 90 days of expenses. That's extremely common in the industry. We may also have a construction reserve. There's different targets. You noted as a percentage of cost of assets, 1% to 2%. We can look at, you know, percentage of our average CIP spend, but that is an additional reserve. The purpose of a construction reserve is, you know, if there's any project cost overruns, or maybe you have, you know, transformers that go out that need to be replaced immediately, then you have some money in the bank sitting there ready to, you know, address those concerns. So, you know, that's the purpose of that reserve. Some utilities will even go a step further and have what we call a rate stabilization reserve, which has some different, you know, industry standard targets. But the purpose of that type of reserve is, you know, maybe you do have a warm winter in the future, and maybe revenue collection is lower than budget. Then you have the money in that reserve where you can, you know, use it to bridge the gap, or perhaps, you know, you're looking at a forecast of a financial forecast of rates. The rate forecast looks too high. some utilities can release the cash in a rate stabilization reserve to try and buy down that increase in the future. The other thing I'll mention from a debt rating perspective, so if we're going to the debt markets, Moody's or S&P might be rating our debt. There's a lot of different metrics they're looking at to give you a rating, not just financial based, but one of the financial metrics they do look at is your cash reserves, and they are typically looking for utilities to have at least 180 days cash on hand to secure, a high rating from a debt perspective.
The 90-day reference is a good one. It ties something to the 25%, which, has been always sort of peculiar in my mind, but that assumes zero revenue for 90 days, and that's not probably realistic. I don't know what kind of a circumstance would come up from that. So I'm wondering whether or not we would have, but this is a discussion for another time. And one of the things that I think it's our job as a council to do, and as we look at this, as we consider, what assumptions that have been plugged in, either from you, Wade, or from Phil, industry standard, whatever it might be. I was sort of struck that the customer growth was pretty minimal. And I think with the increased housing that we're doing, the multifamily and single, all of that, we're in sort of a growth mode, or we're trying to be. So I was surprised that it would be that flat. I mean, less than 1%. I mean, it's like 0.14%. And what that does, I mean, the impact of that, of course, in part, is that it limits the revenue. It's going to be a tamp on that. But our expenses are the same, to your point, Wade. And so that suggests a higher rate. That suggests a rate increase. So those kind of projections, whether they're tied to residential, Suzanne's shop or anybody else, I'm not sure, but that's where I think our role needs to be, is that we're a check on that. Does that make sense? And we're not going to know the answer, but we're going to, ask you whether how'd you get to that? And so I think that's going to be an important part as we go forward. I don't know if you got a comment on that, Wade, or not. You don't need to.
Well, I'll just say that Bonneville has been using our load growth at 0.2 for a while now. And yes, we do have some developments coming online, right? The Riddle Road Apartments is really one, but when you look at even those as a whole, they're not a huge percentage of our overall load. And so what really moves the needle for load growth is large projects, large commercial customers, industrial projects, but residential, multifamily residential, stuff like that, unless we're talking 250 residential homes, it doesn't amount to much on a yearly load growth basis.
That's good. That makes sense. I think, just sort of my take on this whole thing. I think this is particularly a new for us and a contemporary analysis. I mean, I don't know. I think there's at least three things that Monmouth hasn't done this in a long time or has never done this. The cost of service analysis, which we've been beaten to death. The system reinvestment policy. You probably have in your mind what that is, but this may cause you to sort of coalesce, on something a little more substantial. And then the construction reserve, the rate study itself, I think, is really a positive move going forward. So I think you're to be commended on that. And, I particularly appreciated the last note that I have, on, I believe it's page 20, FCS in the middle of interpreting the cost of service results, and then down right before the bulleted points, FCS recommends the following guidelines for considering policy options to adjust existing rates based on cost of service results. And all of those are very, to me, I mean, they seem to fit us. It's cognizant and sort of rate averse, increase averse, but by the same token represents, a forward and progressive way of looking at it. So I just wanted, that hit me as something that ought to be noted. And I think when we get back to this, we go back and sort of look at those general recommendations.
Spur any thoughts, questions, or comments?
I don't know if it's true or not, but my understanding was we used to have a requirement, whether it was imposed from the outside or we only thought it was imposed, to assume that the entire system collapsed and disappeared one night and have enough in reserve to be able to rebuild the whole system. And I don't know. Yeah, I know, right? And I think that was when Monmouth was much smaller and the system was much smaller. We didn't own our own substation, on and on. But that was a driver of the size of the reserve in days long past.
I mean, yeah, that would be impractical to do now because just the power.
That's a good word,
Wade. Transformer would be $2.5 million at the substation. So, but it is conceivable that we could have a rather large ice storm and lose, 15 to 18% of our poles and conductor. And it takes, that's a large lift and a lot of money to stand that infrastructure back up. And that has happened, in my tenure at both utilities I've worked at, where we've seen large ice storms tear down a large portion of systems.
At least we don't have hurricanes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for being with us this evening. Really, really appreciate your explanation. The slides are super helpful. And now we have Wade. Now we can just put it all on him. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Good night.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Have a good evening, guys.
All righty. So that brings us to the reports for this evening. My mayor's report, fairly brief. I just want to comment a couple of opportunities that I've had. We did have the SEDCOR, our Strategic Economic Development organization for Marion, Polk, Yamhill County, had their annual luncheon and awards last Friday, and Polk County showed up. We had an entrepreneur from works out of Indy Commons, a kombucha producer, Max's Booch, and Salt Creek Cider House out on Highway 22 are both recognized. So that shows what we've got going on here in Polk County. And today I really was moved by the procession for the Walnut Heels. And we've heard about that at our last meeting, having that opportunity and being of that age where none of my classmates were called to Vietnam, but several of their older siblings were. And so living through that time and living through the aftermath of the Vietnam War and what it did to our country and how these veterans were treated upon their return, and seeing this opportunity to really think that through and reflect on that and honor that service right here in our community. I think hopefully folks have plans to go visit the Walnut Heels. My understanding is they've got pretty much all the volunteer slots filled, is what I heard. So I'm really, really excited to have folks come into our community and be able to experience that. Also had a chance to celebrate the Monmouth Independence Community Foundation's 25th anniversary. You've heard us talk about that because that is the organization that not only provides scholarships, classroom enrichment grants, is partnered with even our library and our friends of our library, but also other organizations to really encourage philanthropy in our community, but also to make really smart investments by getting everybody's money together. We can do much more with it and create legacies for our two cities and organizations within that. So that was a cool opportunity to celebrate that. That is all I have. We do have a couple of board and commission appointments I wanted to ask you about. Our MyNet board, again, the official representation is one city staff person. That's currently Rochelle. One of us as a liaison, I'm currently serving that. And then we always have one general, one of our residents as another member. That has been since the inception of David Ritchie. David is, and probably has been forever, the board chair of MyNet. And he has actually indicated his willingness to continue. So I would like to offer up his appointment for reappointment to the MyNet board. And then we also had another applicant for the tree board. So yay! Kathleen Lovis has offered to step into that role. So I would consider a motion to approve those two appointments.
I'd move the approval of both.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Carey for the motion and Councillor Oberst for the second. And all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. Thank you. We will get those notifications out and continue to grow our boards and commissions. Other board and commission reports going on. Start to my right, Councillor Oberst.
Tree board comes off of summer hiatus with a meeting this coming Thursday at Power and Light at 6:30. So there you go.
Well, we'll see if we can get Ms. Levis there for her first meeting. I don't know, that's kind of tight. Councillor Carey?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the planning commission met on September 3rd. And Stephen Howard was reelected chair, and Holly Tangeman was elected the vice chair. They went through some training on public meeting laws, and that was a productive one. They had good discussion, and I think it was valuable to them. Their next meeting is October 1 and probably going to involve transportation, discussion. The transportation plan is the most likely. If that's not quite ready, then the economic opportunity assessment discussion will take place. So progress.
And then Councillor Belts and Councillor Ray.
So the Middle Emmett Valley Council of Governments Board of Directors met this afternoon. I told them at the beginning of a noon meeting that I had a 1 o'clock. And so we did a 2-hour meeting in 1 hour because I wanted to watch the wall that heals escorted through Salem. At that meeting, we discussed the general things that you discussed, consent calendar, those kinds of things. The most interesting part, I believe, was discussing the annual dinner plans. And that is an event where we're able to nominate and recognize our own for achievements. And so that will be, because I'm the chair, I get to choose where it's being held. And so my choice is Western Oregon University. I'm still working out a time and a date, but likely February or March. So keep that in mind. We did have a discussion about the net cash on hand. And our executive director search. Currently, the Council of Governments, we appointed McCrae Carmichael, who is on staff, as our interim executive director, and she's willing to serve 6 to 12 months while we evaluate the financial situation that the COG finds itself in right now, looking at our budget, looking at services that the COG is providing, and then making decisions how we move forward from that, which then that will inform how we move forward with finding an executive director. The other meeting that I have coming up is actually this Thursday, but I am volunteering at the Wall That Heals. And at 6 PM on Thursday is when they're having their welcome ceremony. And so since I will be there on Thursday, but I have an Arts and Culture Commission meeting, if one of the counselors would like to step up and substitute for me on Thursday, come talk with me after. I think that is everything. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the Parks and Recreation Board met on September 10th. And one of the, after a long break over the summer, one of the main things that had happened was a number of trees that were either dead or in very poor health were removed from multiple parks. We had Madrona Park had a number of trees that were not doing well, that either were not suited for a wet environment, and so those will need to be replaced. So tree board may play a role in selection of those species. Also had some trees that were moved from Gentle Woods Park and Main Street Park, and not because they didn't look nice, but just because they were in poor health or dead. So the goal is to make those beautiful parks once again with lots of trees, and that's going to be a point of discussion moving forward. Another issue that was discussed was the pickleball court, and talked about some ideas and ways that we can continue to increase the use of that court and make it more accessible. There's some interest in mimicking some of the structure that is in the Dallas area near pickleball courts, and they have some leagues and some tournaments and a lot more organization, and that's something that we would like to bring here if possible. But there's some challenges that they're looking at in terms of how can they set up a league. Is it run through the city? Is it run through a nonprofit? And so there's some things to work out there, but the idea is let's get people connected that want to play together and make it as accessible as possible. But lots of things still coming, but we're just getting back on board for the fall, and we'll have some more plans to come. Thanks.
Go ahead, Councilor Carey.
Was there any discussion about some rudimentary court rules or rules of use that would be avoid fistfights?
Yes. So some etiquette rules I think are not widely known, but the idea was let's take what's worked in other places like the Dallas courts and see if that works here. So you may see some signage coming soon once that's approved that will allow people to claim next game and generally limit games to around 10 to 15 minutes tops before you rotate out and let someone else play.
You can't just like put a quarter on the table and
Yeah.
like you do in pool. Okay. Don't know how that works. Okay. Thank you. Thanks everybody for that. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Everybody seems to be in that summer lull, and now we're getting back after everything. Councilor Obers, a quick question before our city manager.
I saw an interesting article go by that was satellite photos of tennis court complexes that have been converted. And it's in the United States, it's in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tennis courts that are now 4 times that many pickleball courts. And of course, there's the ongoing problem with the sound of pickleballs in residential areas. Anyway, it was an interesting piece, and you drive by down there and it's amazing how often there are people playing. So.
And City Manager Rochelle Rubin.
Thank you, Mayor. So tonight you had public comment regarding a minor partition and the building of a duplex at 210 Walnut Street. Also this week, you received a letter that was addressed to the City Council, which we pushed out to you, so you saw that information. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of history and just a little bit of a reminder for those of you that were on council in 2019. But in 2019, the Oregon State Legislature adopted HB 2001. And that requires cities with populations between 10,000 and 25,000 to allow a duplex to be built on any lot or parcel zoned for residential use that allows for the development of detached single-family dwellings. HB 2001 superseded the city's RS zoning at the time, which only allowed duplexes to be built on corner lots. And then in 2002, the city codified this new requirement of HB 2001 in adopting legislative amendment 2202. I'm also going to ask Justin to give you an update, because this is a current land application, what this could mean in regards to appeal and those types of things, and what the role is for you. So.
Yeah, so the important thing is if you're acting as basically the appeal, or you're deciding an appeal of a land use application, you're acting in a slightly different role than you guys normally do with the normal council business. When you guys are deciding ordinances or resolutions or the things that a city council normally does, you're acting kind of like a legislature. You're making decisions about policy. If you're deciding a land use appeal, and the reason I'm talking about this is because I think this is a type 2, there's the potential that it could be appealed either to the planning commission or the council. If it's appealed to the council, instead of acting like a legislature, you're acting more like a judge. So there's some additional concerns about procedural fairness and impartiality when you're in that role, that are a little different when you are doing the normal city business or city council business. And in particular, ex parte contacts with one of the interested parties can be a concern. Under both the state statutes and actually the Monmouth City Code, any ex parte contact or any individual contact with an interested party has to be disclosed as part of the hearing. And it has to be disclosed with enough information to allow the other parties to address it. Part of it is, in this process, since you're the judge, you're having to make a record, and there has to be a clear record. And if there's an ex parte contact that's not disclosed, then that could be an issue. It could be a ground for the decision to be reversed by LUBA. Not saying it necessarily would be, but it could be. So the point is, be careful. If it's something where it's got the potential to end up before you guys on appeal, be careful about ex parte contacts. It's probably simplest if you just avoid contacts with interested parties about it. But if you do have such a contact, try to document it to make sure it can be appropriately disclosed as part of the hearing.
And so I think some of the ways we respond to that, for example, we all got a copy of the public comment that came to us. If we get any additional information, particularly if it appears it got sent only to you, please be sure not to respond to it. Forward it on to Phyllis. Phyllis can make it available to all of us. I think the other thing we heard tonight, a request to drive through that neighborhood with the intent of looking at it to see the character of the neighborhood, that is absolutely not allowed. So don't go do that. I mean, if you have friends over there, we're not saying you can never go to Walnut Drive, but with the intent of trying to determine how does this look? Is this enough in the surrounding area? I think those are the bigger concerns we've discussed in the past with this kind of thing. If a decision is made, if an appeal is filed, and then if it comes to us, but the damage would be done if we step in now with the potential that it would come to us.
Yeah, again, you're trying to make a record. You're trying to make sure that there's not concerns about impartiality, or you're trying to make it very clear what's in or what's not in the record. So you want to avoid going and doing your own detective work.
Thanks for that. So go ahead, Councilor.
To head off some of that, is there going to be communication with the two interested parties, Lori Lindley and Priscilla, to get them so they understand what the law is and what the decision was based on?
Yeah, I'm planning to respond to both of them and give them the information that I just gave to you, and the fact that this is something that the state is dictating, that it's not the city, and go forward with that and try to address any other concerns that they have, because I can do that.
And I think it would be important to indicate that, because I assume it to be true, and that is that it has or will be considered, fairly and honestly and openly. Is this a staff decision?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. So we've been through those before, and they're well-founded and well-documented and well-based. So, but that doesn't negate the opportunity for appeal, of course. But yeah, hopefully we can get that, averted.
And I think you'll be able to address the other comments we heard about the noticing, right? Making sure that the notice was legal, that what the requirements are and how we met those. So I know that was another issue I heard. Did anyone else hear other issues that they'd like to make sure is addressed in this initial response to these folks? So Ridgway.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm, you talked about some legislation that allowed for the consideration of a duplex in a single family zoned area. So it sounds like though it's allowed, it's not required. There is some.
No, it's actually required. The state has come down, at the time, the state came down to say cities cannot choose not to allow that because of the housing crisis. And some cities' codes did not allow for that. And so the state legislature came in and said, you can't do this anymore. You have to allow a duplex to be built.
Is it duplex or isn't it triplex? Up to a just duplex?
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure if it's a duplex or triplex. It sounds like.
So my recollection is up to the population figure you cited, 25,000. You have no choice but to allow duplex. Over 25,000, it can be up to 4 units on what was originally a single, and the term single family is no longer a term of art. It is now low density residential. We had a recommendation from our consultant as we were working on our zoning law that we allow up to 3 units on a single lot, and we settled on 2, as I recall. We declined to allow a duplex in the backyard of an existing house or a add-on ADU or whatever, however you want to look at it. So that's my recollection of what 2001 says. So under our I think, let me make clear, this is the lawyer, but our current code would not allow a duplex on that lot. And that is why what I believe I heard was this is a request for a partition of the existing lot into 2 lots so that new partition lot is in fact eligible for duplex. So that's my understanding from the things I heard tonight and just sort of background from my involvement with planning.
Yeah, I think that's all correct.
Oh, sorry.
And then one other follow-up on that. Is there a sunset on the housing shortage crisis, or is that just forever until there's new legislation crafted?
That would have to be addressed in the state legislature. I mean, it's basically a state statute directive, and I don't believe there's a sunset in the statute.
I don't think that was in response to, because back years and years ago, I don't think it was in response to a housing emergency. I think that was literally just we've got to start building more kind of thing. So I don't think there's a declared emergency about that part. So, all right, go ahead. Other things, Rochelle.
Onward. I'd like to note that the COG has asked me to be on the Financial Advisory Committee. Myself and another city manager, Scott Derrickson, from Woodburn, are on that committee with some other folks. And so we're going to start meeting to help the COG take a look at their situation. So I was asked to be on that. The Trolley IGA, I met today with Independent City Manager Kenna West, and she'll be taking it to her city council next week. This was an agreement that I brought to council, the IGA that I brought to council in February. And so we're hoping to get that moving forward so that we can get that going and bring it back to council. Also, just to give you an update on the stop shelters, we have 8 stop shelters that we purchased and we had put together in June of this year. And questions are coming up as to when they're going to go in. It's currently in Chariots Ballpark. They need to install those stop shelters there's 4 in Monmouth and 4 in Independence. And so I've pinged them again to try to get some information as to when they think the installation of that will occur. But just to give you an update on that. Also, yesterday I was contacted by DAS, or Department of Administrative Services, with the state. And so we're working on all the paperwork to accept the 1.75 million for the trolley funding through the state legislature. So excited about that. The Monmouth Recreation Project, the final phase of that was put out to bid and received 8 responsive bidders. Notice of intent will be issued this week, and the low bidder was Darwin Build out of Vancouver, Washington, and they came in under budget. So we were excited about that. Main Street Park is getting new interior sidewalks and should be done by tomorrow and open for pedestrians this week. The Monmouth Avenue paving will be completed tomorrow through Wu Campus, striping to follow, and road open to the public by Monday. At the latest, in line for that was when their street closure permit expires. In the budget this year, we budgeted for working with the City of Independence to have IT support, and we did interviews and they've hired someone, and he will be starting on the 29th. I apologize, I don't have his name on the top of my head, but we're very excited about getting that moving forward and getting everything transitioned over from Polk IT. I'd like to apologize for this evening for the technical difficulties that we've been experiencing. We have had the contractor who installed the equipment come back twice. We've done additional training. Before this meeting, I asked Phyllis to contact our presenter, make sure that the connection would work, make sure that everything would work. It worked great this afternoon, and then we had the bit of problems there. But that'll be one of the first things when we have a dedicated IT staff, that they will be here to get this figured out. We have problems because we're on a very secure network and all of those things. Once we're on our own network, it's gonna make a big difference. And so I do apologize. I understand that can be very frustrating. Let's see what else. The finance director recruitment is now open and out. That went out yesterday, and it's on our social media and it's on our website. So if you know of anybody, please direct them to our website to take a look at that. The city received an ODOT update on the Northwest Oregon ADA curb ramp Phase 2 project. Work will begin on October 13th in Salem and continue to Monmouth, Independence, Newburgh, Corvallis, and Cottage Grove, not necessarily in that order. Their goal is to enhance safety and accessibility for all pedestrians while minimizing disruption to local communities. ODOT will coordinate with each city to provide updates on construction schedules, traffic impacts, and those type of things. And so we'll keep you updated as that goes forward. Monmouth Power and Light is nearing the end of their meter replacement project. This has been a 3-year project, and there's just under 800 meters to go. So excited about that. Public Power Week is in October, and Director Carey will be the speaker at the quarterly town hall, which is on October 14th here at 5:30 p.m. On September 11th, Sergeant Smith, Officer McBride, and Officer Stevenson of the Monmouth Police Department received recognition at the Polk County Fire Department board meeting for their actions on an active CPR call a couple weeks ago. So that was exciting. And we, at our all hands meeting last night, Chief Ben talked about Monmouth Police and how because they react and because they go right in and they don't wait for emergency services to get there, they're actually the first to get in, that they saved this man's life. And that's very exciting to understand that our police department reacts that way and plays a vital role in life saving. Let's see. The September podcast is out featuring Barbara Cronin, Monmouth Senior Center Director. September is National Senior Center Month, and there's quite a bit going on. First of all, I just want to let you know the seniors have a trip scheduled on the 19th to go to the Wall That Heals. So I'm excited for those that are attending that. Then there's going to be a senior housing speaker series. And on September 30th, there's 3 different things. On September 30th, there's a documentary screening of No Place to Grow Old at 6 p.m. at the Senior Center. And then on October 9th at 6 p.m., the AARP Oregon State Director, Bandana Shrestha, is coming as a guest speaker, and there's meals, dinner is served during this event as well. And she will be discussing housing challenges of Oregon and Polk County. And then on November 15th, there'll be a community listening and visioning session at 12 noon. Lunch will be provided, and it will give residents the ability to share their ideas about what they'd like to see in a senior center and senior housing. And then just some other events coming up, the Cultural Harvest Collective. There's 2 remaining Sundays that they'll be in the park on Sunday from 10 to 2, and that's September 21st and 28th. September 23rd at 6 p.m., the Senior Center along with Mid-Valley Parenting are hosting a generational dinner. This is free and all ages are welcome. And then September 24th will be Welcome to Monmouth for the WU students, and that will be in the park. The firefighters are coming to cook hamburger dinners, and there's 5 or 6 volunteer spots still open. So if anyone's interested, please let Susanna or I know. And then October 1st is Coffee with a Cop at the Sippery from 8 to 10. October 3rd is History Mystery. And then just to let you know that the LSU conference is coming up, and I will be gone October 1st through the 4th. We have a board meeting on the 1st, and then the conference starts the 2nd, and that will be up in Portland. And that's all I have.
Please. And we signed the paperwork to get the money from DAS also for the water effluent relocation project. I had to go sign off on that. So we got that check coming, I think, and started submitting all the stuff we're gonna do our land swap. So it's like a lot going on all of a sudden. So, all right. Are there any council comments or announcements before we adjourn?
Just quickly, we had, and no need to apologize, it just happens when we don't get the good audio, on our virtual visits from our consultants. I think this has kind of fallen the way of working at home instead of coming into the office. And the consultant and I'm assuming they're based out of Seattle, so I think that's probably where they were. That would be a little different, but there are opportunities for people, to come and present in person, especially if it's information that you'd like to have a little more byplay on. It's a little hard working through with audio and everything else. If it costs us an extra couple $1,000, I think it's time well invested. If people were to come and attend one of these, they're going to appreciate seeing the consultant that's here. Can't always be done. I understand that. But I would like to just suggest that we look for opportunities to get our consultants, and we've got a lot of them, thankfully, that they are here if they can.
Just for fun, a lot of people play with the calendar. You may have noticed that 3/14 is also known as Pi Day, March 14th, that May the 5th, or May the 4th is May the 4th be with you. Today is Pythagorean Theorem Day. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. You can make a square corner guaranteed with a 3, 4, 5 triangle. If you square those numbers, you get today's date. So it's
I
Pythagorean
accept a
Theorem.
motion to adjourn.
Oh, come on, we never have fun comments.
So
I had to have a fun one.
All in favor? Thank you for the motion, Councilor Belts. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.